do you actually see things changing? So do you find that, the stuff that's happening in safeguarding, I'm not just talking about solutions, the things that you've been talking about, do you find that that's changing? Do you think people are getting it better? Do you think they are starting to focus a bit more on training? And also, actually, probably, is the training right? Is it people, as we talked about with the product, where you're sort of going, here's the training, I'm off now, see you later, thanks very much. I've done, I've given you the 10 things you need to think about. How you perform those are up to you now, and I've gone out of here.
And I think that's exactly the issue. I do think there has been a huge realisation that safeguarding needs to be professionalised, at the very least in record keeping. And we have seen that. There's no doubt about the fact that people realise that has to be the case. Whether it's because they're seeking compliance, which is an important thing to do, but it's got to be in the context of actually the safety of the children, not simply to achieve compliance. So we've definitely seen a move in that direction. I think training is really patchy. I've sat through the 63 PowerPoint presentation slide, for governors, for 2 hours on a steaming hot summer's evening, sat on a tiny chair in a school hall, with absolutely no opportunity to discuss with other governors, or because I'm going to be front-loaded for 2 hours and I'm going to get loads of information that I don't need and no opportunity to discuss the things that I really do need to talk about. Painful. When Ofsted come, governors have had their training, staff have had their training, tick, 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 this is the date it happened on. I do think that has to change. We have started delivering safeguarding training because we do think that is an important component, and it does need to be CPD certified. It does need to be of the right quality. It does need to require people to go away and do their own self-directed learning and then come back and demonstrate their learning and pass a course, not to sit in front of some PowerPoint slides and get a signature on a sheet to say they've been there. I've been to the cinema with my children in my earlier years and fell asleep through the whole thing. Who hasn't? That's what happens when you're a parent, right? So, people sitting and listening to safeguarding training and kind of thinking about what they're going to do at the weekend, because they don't have to contribute, they don't have to go and do any self-directed learning, they don't have to pass a knowledge check to make sure that they've understood. I think that is next to useless.
I agree.
So for me, I think that's where the next big move is, to actually make sure that we professionalise the profession of safeguarding, and the people that actually are asked to perform that role do so because they want to and because they've got the expertise and capability.
So would you like to see the DfE certifying then, accrediting, people who are managing safeguarding? Or do you think that is, again, a little bit like a tick box exercise? It needs to be proper sort of...
I would like to see postgraduate qualifications in safeguarding. I'd like to see ISO standards for safeguarding. Because actually I think it's far wider than schools, for a start. Again, back to follow the child. Wherever that child is, with a responsible adult, somebody needs to be making sure that child's okay. So actually, I'd like to see standards that every profession has to follow, whether it's teaching, whether it's policing, whether it's healthcare, whether it's social care, actually, because then you draw them together into a joint experience of learning. And how many, I can really, really, feel myself the benefit that I've had over the years of having multi-agency training. It's where you learn most and where you develop those relationships. But when you've got an incident, you don't ring a name in a book. You're ringing somebody you've met before, maybe had a coffee with, been on a course with, whatever. Those relationships are out the way. You've done all the, hi, how are you? My name is, you've done that. You're now into, we understand each other. And now I want to discuss a really important issue with you. So the more multi-agency training that we can do, the better. When I was in Dorset Police, we used to do our leadership training with a major global investment bank. And on day one, you would think them and police sergeants and police inspectors have absolutely nothing in common. After the first hour, they've all realised they've got exactly the same issues because they've got a demanding job and they've got a demanding home life. They've got all these dilemmas with staff in the workplace. Yep. They've got demanding customers. And before long, leadership actually spans all professions because the same challenges happen. There may be different technical knowledge required, but actually, when it comes to kind of leadership and leadership in safeguarding, there are common issues across all of the agencies. So I think that that's where, for me, we need to scope to where the puck is. That's where this is heading.
It's even worse. It's actually interesting because in some ways, so you've been in the police force, so you've had to deal with adolescents and children, all the time, and understand the different psychology, I suppose, of children and adolescents. It's a little bit like going back to the point you made on, what would you do if there was, two children in the same class and about sexual allegations, as it were. You're right. I wouldn't know what to do at all. Do I count myself as somebody who's reasonably, got a reasonable good EQ with adults? Yeah, of course. But I don't with children in the slightest. If you asked me to be a safeguarding officer and said, right now you need to manage these different scenarios, I think I definitely would struggle actually. Yeah. I don't know how children are going to react necessarily in different scenarios. And you don't want either of them to be bullied, and you don't want either of them. So you can't just separate them because obviously the peers are still there. They won't always have teachers around them. So actually, it's even more important that they're trained to be able to manage those different, really difficult scenarios.
Yeah, completely. And to understand what's the next agency going to be expecting of me. Now, I think. Yeah. One of the common issues that comes is, safeguarding leads will say, and rightfully with lots of evidence, that because of austerity and different priorities in local authorities, that actually the bar has been raised. So when they try to refer a case to a local authority, far more of them are being referred back to the school without being accepted. They will also say that as soon as the local doctor in CAMS, the Community Mental Health Team, knows that the school has got a counsellor, there will quite often be a referral back to the school council instead of them being accepted for clinical intervention by CAMS. So getting those people in the same room, training together, working together, understanding each other's issues and problems, rather than lots of harassed and overworked people in both organisations moaning about each other, seems to me a much more constructive thing to be able to do.
Very true.
Because then we've set our expectations of each other, we've learned what each other's challenges are, so we're far more likely to work together productively and cooperatively. And communication. So for me, those sorts of things are really important. So I think in some respects, there's been a move, as many people will know, from local safeguarding children's board, at which education had a seat, to local safeguarding partners, where education don't have a seat by right. The encouragement is to involve education. But actually, I think that's a retrograde step, because through education, you have such a window on the lives of those young people. Is absolutely enormous. And actually, they will tell you what's going on. They see those kids for more hours a day than many of their families will. And they will see the people that they're associating with, the stuff that's going on. They suspect maybe some drug abuse going on, whatever it happens to be. They will be the people who can give you really valuable information and insights about what's going on. And the more that they work with other agencies, and it goes back to this point about looking outside the fence, both in a preventative sense, but also when you're trying to solve a tricky issue or a problem, having those relationships and that understanding is absolutely critical. I mean, I talked about the training that we used to do the immersive training that the Hydra Foundation run. But we would be in those scenarios for 3 days, immersed for 3 days in nothing but these incidents, or incredibly long hours. But we would have proper newsreaders coming down and interviewing us, meeting role players who are the family of the bereaved. Proper training and preparation. Nothing could ever really prepare you for the real thing, but you can go a hell of a lot better than a PowerPoint deck.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And when you've got some of these really tricky issues that people are trying to handle, they deserve it. They really do deserve preparation for what you're asking them to do.
Yeah. Proper role play, like you say.
Fundamentally important. And all that effort that's put into sometimes some other things around getting the paperwork right or whatever, important, but actually preparing the people and giving people that 360-degree view of a child who is an alleged abuser. What's going on in their life? Did they start off that way? Actually, how do we intervene? For me, this is really an important part of taking a rounded view. It's not tick box, comply, move on. It's actually engage, change life, change direction, achieve lifelong success. And fundamental as that, really.
No, that's really good. Really, really good. I fully agree with you. And is that why you've now sort of started to breach out away from the schools? Because you now are obviously getting more and more engaged in other areas of the community, as it were.
Yeah, to be honest, because of the experience that Mike and I had of multi-agency working, schools was quite clearly the place to start, if I can put it that way, both because we could see some awful risks, but also it's the place where you can often make the most difference. You really can, because you can develop a relationship of trust in the way that police not always can, for example, or that healthcare can't always do, or social care are seen as an arm of the state, an element of control. As opposed to education, where actually you should be feeling this person's on my side. If I'm a child, they're on my side. They're here for me. Even if that means correcting my behaviour, they are actually ultimately here for me. But this issue is only ever going to be advanced. I would never say solved, because it won't be. But the way we advance our practice is to say, follow the child, follow the vulnerable adult, follow their experience, go where they go. And it's interesting that in the way that the understanding has developed in education of safeguarding, we're now seeing that across a number of other sectors. And actually, it's as much as people coming to us, rather than us being consciously trying to sell into different sectors or whatever, that actually started. It's difficult to choose a time, isn't it? When you branch out, so that's always a difficult decision, but actually almost the decision was made for us by people coming to us and saying, you know what, we've heard about, and that's interesting, and tell us about it. So we do a huge amount now in sports at a national level, with top football clubs, rugby unions, major sports organisations. We do a lot in the third sector. We do a lot in the faith sector.
The third sector, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, non-government organisations, so charities, community groups, and so on and so forth. So really very, very interesting, but fundamentally the same issues.
Yeah, sure.
And fundamentally those dilemmas about, okay, I'm presented with a situation, I know I've got to record things, and that the software can help me and it can guide me through to an extent, you know, we were always aiming for kind of unconscious competence. You know, if at least if I do these things, I should be in the right place unconsciously. But actually, if you're consciously competent and you know exactly the questions to ask, even if you don't know what the answers should be,
yep,
knowing the right questions to ask makes the difference. It's that professional curiosity, not taking things at face value.
yep,
You know, that actually really does help, because so many things become complicated and difficult because of assumptions.
yeah, yeah. Wow. So, okay, so you're reaching out to these different clubs and things. Okay, and charities. Wow, that's quite amazing in the same right. So you are becoming a community solution rather than just a school solution, or yeah. It really is.
I mean,
pure out safeguarding.
Yeah, I mean,
proper safeguarding.
Yeah, I mean, it's One Team Logic, the safeguarding company. That's what we do. You know, I mean, we're fantastically fortunate that when Mike and I had done all our research and whatever, and we realised, hold on, there's a workflow in here that actually could help people.
Yep.
So they don't have to pick a book up every time. And what do I do next? Actually, if I follow this, I can be competent. We had the great good fortune through a colleague, Neil Watkins at Everything ICT, to be introduced to our third co-founder, Daryl Morton. And Daryl was running a software company up near Talbot Green at the time in Cardiff. And they were building systems for the National Health Service, for British Airways, for Associated British Ports, Sapura, building world-class software systems. And we literally were introduced to Daryl. 2 days later, we'd met Daryl, told him the story, got it straight away. 2 weeks later, we'd formed the company, and this is the middle of 2014.
Yep.
2 months later, we had the first version of the product to start testing it.
Yeah.
And that was September 2014. And in January 2015, we came to market. And having a software team that's that experienced has just been phenomenal.
Yeah.
Because it's got to be right. You know, when you're standing in court and somebody says, so what happened on this day? And you can point to the record you made, the audit trail that sits behind it. And actually, you know, just go and look at the cases where somebody's been jailed, social workers, police officers, for altering paper records, for destroying paper records. It is a total nightmare, you know, and you do need to be able to rely on that record. And so that was one of the early lessons, really. And we had people saying, well, if it's not written down on paper, of course, it's not admissible in court. So, to which my kind of stock response was, when we seized 2 tons of cocaine in police, do you think we took 2 tons of cocaine to court? Or maybe we took a digital photograph of it with a laboratory report. Oh yeah, good point, well made. And banks don't take ledgers and quill pens to court anymore. They take electronic records.
Yeah.
So it took us a little while to kind of get over that kind of mental barrier, if you like, you know. But we were so fortunate that, and in fact, we bought Daryl's company ultimately. Yep. So we inherited that wonderful team. So we have just got a phenomenal team who are absolutely at the top of their game. And constantly innovating using the latest technologies. Security, as you might imagine, is our absolute #1 priority.
Yep.
Because of the data, accessibility of the data, the fact the school is the data controller, it's their data. So actually being that, you know, trusted partner with the school, as opposed to, oh yeah, we buy that stuff from those guys over there, and we've got a relationship, you know, and we do see it as a partnership, very much so, because we're supporting them to do one of the most important things that they'll ever do in a child's life, you know, and for us, that's...
So that's quite interesting. So one of the questions I was going to ask you is about the sort of software and where it should go. So one of the things is obviously a lot of the information about a child is already in the MIS. And I think I know your answer going to be to this now, but but ultimately, obviously, you could argue with all this consolidation that's going on. So not just in the market generally, but when you look at a MAT is sort of going right. I don't want multiple MISs. I just want one. I don't want to be buying lots of solutions. I just want ultimately, I'd like it to be in the MIS if I can. But I'm guessing in some ways, and you correct me, but I'm guessing in some ways that you would suggest that actually because it's such important information and it's information that should be protected, actually in some ways being outside of the MIS is actually quite important in its own right.
It is for those practical reasons, because actually the relationships about who has access to what level of data. Some people could see nothing, some people could see some things, some people could see everything. Some people could administer, some people can only see data reports, they can't see anything that's personal information and so on and so forth. It is actually complex. And also the way we've architected it, it enables trusted external partners to be invited into casework as well. In the right circumstances, and again, you have to record your decision about why you're doing that and all that kind of stuff. It is complex because it's based on safeguarding practice.
Yeah,
it's not a register that ticks something. The chronology is the bedrock of any investigation, but also of any safeguarding concern. And having that immutable record is really important. The issue is making sure that the integration works well between systems. As a chief constable, I didn't have firearms licensing in the same IT system as fixed penalty tickets for speeding or parking. I had about 40 different systems. But what I made sure was that if the custody sergeant had somebody coming into custody, we could not only see when they'd last been arrested, but we could also see if they held a firearms license. We could see if we'd got an outstanding warrant for them from the warrant system, because all of those have got really specialist knowledge required of them. And safeguarding is exactly the same. It is specialist, there's no doubt about it. And trying to kind of, oh yeah, our system does everything, it'll milk the cow and make coffee as well kind of type stuff, kind of misses the professional point. Some of these specialisms are very, very specialist.
So ultimately, sorry.
No, I was going to say, so for legal reasons and professional reasons, it's important that the integration is great, whether that's through a third-party integrator, whether that's through an API, but actually that works really well. So that you can actually, the right people get the right information they need at the right time in the right place to take the right decision. And that's ultimately what you're talking about. Not allowing everybody to see everything all the time because they might need to.
Yeah. It's interesting because ultimately what you're saying is if you care enough about it and get the best of breed, and so ultimately that's really important. And actually when somebody's, rather than having a jack of all trades, a master at none sort of type scenario, and this is so important that actually, yes, it should be a dedicated system to meet those safeguarding needs.
Yeah, very much so. And bear in mind, that it's not only about the MIS, but it's also the integration with behaviour, because some people use behaviour management that's not in an MIS system, and not every system will be the best system. So actually it's find what's best for you and make sure it'll play nicely with the other things that you want to use.
But definitely take it seriously.
For sure.
Yeah,
absolutely right.
So where do you, if you were going to have your crystal ball, so 3 to 5 years into the future, where would you like to see safeguarding? Where do you think it's going to be? Where do you think people are going to be around safeguarding?
I think it needs to be a professional practice, a professional qualification, and something that people can aspire to. I mean, I always kind of compare it to forensics and where forensics used to be. So when I joined the police service a while ago, there was a bit of fingerprinting going on. There was some photography going on. So a crime scene, there'd be fingerprints, a bit of blood, maybe for grouping or whatever. Coming to the 80s, DNA, and then people, and so it grows. And it started off being police officers that were doing it, and then it was civilians employed by the police. And then it was a bit of training at the police training school. One of the last things that one of the sort of pro bono things that I used to do was I used to lecture on a bachelor's and master's forensic course at Bournemouth University.
Wow.
Because it's a profession now. And youngsters aspire to that profession from school. And they take science subjects and they get into forensic science. And now you're into digital forensics, as well as all the kind of traditional kind of fingerprints, DNA, blood, body fluids, all that kind of stuff. It's a huge and complex topic. And now with familial DNA, if you have a rape, say for example, you might not have that individual on file, the offender, but you might have a member of their family on file, and being able to trace people through familial DNA. So huge advances that make us all safer. I see safeguarding moving in that direction, that actually what we need to be is the forensics kind of roadmap, is actually let's get to a point where we absolutely have got all the scientific learning, all of this stuff is pulled together about behaviour, about psychology, about adverse childhood experiences. There is a massive amount of literature out there, rarely pulled together, but there's also the professional practice. And that was the great thing about forensics. You didn't need to understand all the science to be able to go out and collect the evidence. You just needed to know how to collect the evidence. And I see the same in safeguarding. There is a real, there's one end of it where you do need to know the psychology and all the complexities of the science. There's the other end of it where you are practicing safeguarding. But you need to know the practical application of that science, because people do safeguarding. And if you don't understand that and you can't bring those lessons to bear, you're not going to succeed. You'll have a good go, maybe, but having a good go isn't good enough.
So you're going to be the new Socko. Is Socko, if I remember rightly?
Exactly.
Oh, I remember these words.
Absolutely, why not?
The new Socko of safeguarding. There you go, that's a new strapline as well. Anyway. Okay, that sounds great. And regarding then, so where do you see then my concern fitting into that new role? So where do you see safeguarding in 3 to 5 years?
I think it's going to be able to support every aspect of safeguarding, because some safeguarding is about professionals reporting things. Some of it is about victims being able to report things that happen to them. Some of it is about reporting about professionals. Some of it is the data science behind it and actually saying, what could we predict might happen next? So what machine learning can we get out of all the data we hold? What AI tools could we maybe bring to bear? Because we will have, not just in safeguarding, but in the professions of safeguarding. So I'm not just talking about what we do in education, but actually from policing, from social care, actually put a digital scientist behind all of that stuff, and you're going to learn some stuff. But with systems thinking, knowing it is not enough. Doing it is the difference. And it's amazing, the number of times people know what they ought to be doing, or we know what we ought to be doing because somebody's done the research. They just don't implement it. They're looking for another silver bullet solution to solve a problem to which we already know the answer, because they don't like the answer, because it takes too long. It's politically inconvenient. It goes beyond our parliamentary timescale or whatever it is. And change, sadly, does sometimes take time.
Yeah, sure.
So I do think for us, being that building block, I mean, we talk, people talk about SaaS products, software as a service. Well, our definition of SaaS is safeguarding as a service.
Yeah.
And actually, that's what we ultimately provide and will provide into the future, and just expand the extent and capability of that service, is to provide safeguarding as a service to professionals that need to do safeguarding. Because ultimately, our aim is to protect people around the world from abuse, harm, neglect. And we mean it.
Yeah, sure. No, I think it's, do you know, it's definitely aspiring, you know, the what you talk about is inspiration in the sense of, you know, I love the idea, and as a product manager, so this isn't necessarily just about safeguarding, but as a product manager, you know, I always talk to people about, you know, that technology is, you know, don't use technology for technology's sake. You know, ultimately it has to be something, you should always be looking around for new technologies and how it can make life better for you and your customers and your users and the people they have and their needs. And you know, you go one step further because you as a company actually live it. You know, you are literally living this. This is our approach. This is the approach that works. And actually, we will constantly be learning. We will constantly be looking around to ensure that basically everybody, you know, if it needs to be a bit of technology, then fine. If it needs to be a bit of training, fine. If it needs a bit of education, we'll educate people, fine. Whatever people need, we will give them everything they have that we can offer to actually deliver that. Ultimately, what it ends up, as you said, is protecting children. I think it's really, really inspirational. I think it's really good. You know, brilliant.
And it's actually lifelong, because we are now, you know, reaching a time with an aging population where actually those needs go on in life. You know, you look at the financial abuse of the elderly, for example. You know, and we work with some of our former financial investigators who are involved in that kind of work. And there is a whole community out there who sometimes are barely recognised in terms of the abuse that they're suffering.
Sure.
So there's a big responsibility for those of us that are kind of involved in safeguarding to think about those things and to think about how we can support people, you know, throughout their lives without being intrusive, without creating fear, but actually doing it in a way that actually releases them to achieve whatever it is they want to achieve, rather than making them a victim of our process because commercially it works for us. That's not in our lexicon, really. You know, to be honest, yes, of course, we've got to pay the wages and all that kind of stuff, but it's far more important to us to change the way that safeguarding is done.
Yeah.
Because the outcomes, you know, are so worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And I suppose even with the sort of older generation, there's also the element where I think we probably sometimes neglect them more. You know, I don't want to say this; it sounds horrible, but it's almost because they're not the future. You know, the children are the future.
And you know, some of the stuff, you know, when an elderly person can't go out and do their shopping, they give somebody their bank card to do 20 quid's worth of shopping, and then somebody has a look at the bank account and there's online betting going on and all this kind of stuff. The life savings have gone. You know, it's too late once that's happened. So there's some brilliant work going on around banking, and not always the mainstream banks actually, but to enable, for example, a carer to have a card on that person's account, but that particular card is limited in the amount of money they can spend on it, and so on and so on. You know, some really innovative stuff coming along that's preventative, and that's how you want people to think about it. Let's not sweep up when all the glass is on the floor and the damage has happened. Let's actually create healthy, happy lifestyles that enable people to avoid becoming a victim. Prevention,
yeah. So what's the next big thing for you and Mike then?
Well,
you've got massive amount of passion about this, and I just wonder if you're going to move on to anything else, or are we going to stick to this?
I'm going to say this publicly simply because it'll force us to finish it, but it's the book. So we have completed the first draft of the book, and we're in second draft as we speak, because we do think it's important to write some of this stuff down. And to share it and to get people's feedback on it, you know, and because we need to learn all the time too. So that's, you know, when you're not working, you're thinking about work type stuff, you know. That's hugely important. But, you know, for all of us in the team, it really is just those wonderful, wonderful stories about the difference that something's made.
Yep.
You know, and so the more people we can help,
sure,
the better, you know. We've got this kind of irritable habit of never being satisfied with anything. So always looking for, how do we get that better? That's not right. We've got to be able to, you know, which is irritating, but ultimately, you know, it gets you out of bed in the morning, doesn't it? You know, there's another hill to climb.
And it also shows that you care about what you're doing. For me, that's ultimately that's what it means. And I'm not going to let you get away with it. So you've already said that you're going to put a book togetger, and you said that it might force you to do it. So when are you predicting when it will come out?
Right. Okay. Yeah. By the end of the year. By the end of the year, definitely.
I was going to say November. Yeah. That'll force it. That'll force it. Oh, yeah. Fantastic. I have to say, it's been brilliant. It's been fantastic to talk to you. You know, I think you're, like I say, I know I've used it a couple of times already, but I think what you and the company are doing are inspirational. I think, you know, I love the approach and the culture and the behaviour that you guys have regarding, you know, the subject matter as well. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and you know, my hat goes off to you. So a big thank you for willing to come on here.
Thank you, Nick. Any opportunity to talk about our favourite topic. And my wife does say that if I open the fridge and the light comes on, I start talking about safeguarding, but you know, it's kind of, any opportunity.
Superb. A big thank you.